Myths are public dreams. Dreams are private myths.
1, 2, 3, 4.
So when I first moved to Providence, I reached out to a few people. I had looked up songwriters in the area, but it was all these really out-of-date websites that weren't really great resources for finding musicians. So I reached out to the one person I knew in town, and she was like, "Oh, well, my dad books music in Newport." Didn't even know that at the time, but she was like, and he knows some people that he works around some people that book music in Providence, so I can put you in touch. I reached out to them. Roundabout, ended up in an email chain with a guy, and he says, "Oh, I can get you on this birthday night. I think we could probably fit in an artist like you to open the show up." Some dates moved around, but lo and behold, he was like, "This is going to be a show for you. Good people that you should meet, because this guy that's playing it's his birthday. #1 country act in Providence, voted by one of our local publications and all this stuff. So this will be great for you." And he got me in, and this show occurred last week. I got to meet my guest today, as well as all of the musicians he was associated with. Bunch of really great people, really kind people, welcoming people. And yeah, the birthday boy himself, Jake Hunsinger of Jake Hunsinger and the Rock Bottom Band, one of Providence's primary, most famous, most favorite country bands.
One of 5.
One of 5. That is precisely probably where we're going to kick things off. But we'll start with you as an artist before we move to Providence as your home base. A country act from Pennsylvania. I would like to hear about how you found yourself as a country artist.
So, if you asked me 10 years ago, would I be doing this as a country guy, or even if I'd be playing music full time, I'd probably say no to country, and I really hope so, to play music in general. I feel like I've kind of come full circle, because when I was a kid, my listening preferences were my parents' preferences, and my mom loved 90s country, which didn't end until 2004, and my dad, he would sing John Prine, George Jones, even older stuff like Hank Snow and stuff to me when I was a kid. And, my dad had all the classic country, and my mom had all the new stuff at that point. And that was just my childhood. And then when I was 7, my dad and I were in Walmart, and there was a Elvis Presley Pez dispenser set, and it had 2 CDs and 2 Pez dispensers. It had Young Elvis and Fat Elvis. And I was like, "Oh, what's that?" And Dad got it for me, and I listened to that CD daily. It was that and the Disney theme song CD that my mom got me for Christmas. And that's kind of how I started my musical journey, beyond just whatever my parents sang to me or whatever was just on, And then it was I can trace the line. It was Elvis, the Beatles, Rolling Stones, 60s British Invasion, then 70s hard rock. I was into real heavy metal for a while too. Still kind of am, but that's not my primary listening. Then I come back to America with Bruce Springsteen. My dad loves Bruce Springsteen. Then from Springsteen I get to Dylan, then the real songwriters and all that. And then I find Merle Haggard on Sirius Radio when I'm driving one day, and that's when I'm 18, and I'm like, "Oh, I remember this. This is something my dad used to sing to me when I was a kid." And then I started just kind of rediscovering everything, consciously rediscovering everything that was my childhood.
This was at about what age you're talking about?
So it really started with Bob Dylan. I'd say 18.
Okay.
Yeah, I was 18 when I started really rediscovering my American roots, with music. When I was listening to Springsteen when I was 15, 16, that wasn't even because he was American, it's because it was Bruce Springsteen. I love Bruce Springsteen. But I was also listening to British punk at that time too, The Clash. I didn't really come back home until when I was 18 and in college. And from Springsteen, I went back to Merle Haggard, and I was obsessed with Haggard for a long time. And then I just start rediscovering everything that was, you know, because like there's a song we play called "Please Don't Bury Me" by John Prine. My dad sang that to me every day when I was a kid. I didn't know that was by John Prine. I mean, I knew, but I didn't know consciously, you know. So it's, you know, like when you're a kid, like you just get things through osmosis, and you're only getting part of it.
Yeah.
You know. And then it felt like there was like a real like, you know, coming home moment with all this stuff. It was like, I remember this now. You know, I'm getting that sort of Proustian like vague memory stuff from all this. And then I ended up going further with it, you know. And now it's practically all I listen to. 8 years in, you know, to like, you know, coming back home to that. It's just all country music all day, every day, new and old.
Is it still a lot of Merle Haggard? Is it just like as wide? What's that look like?
So it's much wider.
Mm-hmm.
Because like after a certain point, you've heard all the classics and all the deep cuts from the classics. So now I'm like really looking for like new country, new traditional country. So people like there's a new guy out now named Zach Top. I love his album. I love his voice. Love his guitar playing. He's 26 and he's riffing. Like he's like a continuation of what like 1990s country neo-traditional stuff could have been if it didn't start becoming like arena rock, you know? Because like I follow, with all my musical obsessions, I follow it back to the source. And that's how like, you know, I get to like different areas of it. So it's like I find one thing I really like, where'd this song come from? Who inspired this and that? Then I kind of go back and back and back. So like from Merle Haggard, for example, I went back to Win Stewart, you know, and then I went back to Lefty Frizzell, Jimmy Rogers, Roy Acuff. Sorry, I'm trying to paint the actual like chronology, and it's Roy Acuff before Jimmy Rogers.
Gotcha. Sorry, no more elbow room there, by the way.
Don't worry about it. I take up too much room.
It's so interesting that like I think what you just laid out is a very similar experience for a lot of different artists, but with different key players. And like there's different artists that open these doors for different songwriters in particular. I think like I don't I think for me, I would plug in different names into those little spots for like, well, first there was this person that was a monumental thing, and this was the foundation, and then this person opened this door. Why do you think it was Merle Haggard that stood out in that sort of description for you, that kind of got you starting to connect with that avenue of music?
I thought he looked cool on the Mama Tried album cover, you know? That was like the first thing that made me go, oh, okay, like what's this? And like, this is just me clicking around on the big computer on YouTube, you know? Because like all of my music before, like I was late to get an iPhone. I never had an iPod. I had an iPad, but I broke that. No, it was just me sitting at the desktop computer, clicking through YouTube, finding things. And there's stuff on YouTube of like real deep cuts of like just people you've never heard of, like that song Psycho by Jack Kettle, I think his name. Never heard that before. I think it was only on YouTube, and then they finally put it on streaming. But regardless of that, there was like something that drew me to that picture of Merle Haggard. And I clicked on it, and it was Mama Tried, and I loved it, you know? And it was just, I hadn't heard anything quite like that consciously. You know, again, like, because I need to really like draw the distinction between like hearing things and then truly absorbing them, you know, because I'm a very active listener now, but like we're not actively paying attention to everything all the time. And when it became conscious and active, it lit up my brain. You know, that's when the journey really began on the country music aspect.
So I think we're going to circle right back to that point, but I want to ask you before I forget, tell me about your hometown in Pennsylvania.
So Hazleton, Pennsylvania, and I do exaggerate this part a little bit sometimes when I'm on stage, but no, it's the biggest town, I'm pretty sure, in Luzerne County, and that's where my dad's from, and you know, I've always considered that to be home. It's actually a pretty industrial town now, but my family's been there for a very long time. I think it's actually like, you know, where like the Hunsingers like in that area started. And, you know, it's like any Rust Belt town now, you know, just higher up, you know. I go home and visit my pappy, and, you know, it's just his house, his other house, all like in this really dense, small town city. And that's really, you know, when I was a kid, it was like the only thing in town that actually mattered. That and Cassatt's. Cassatt's was a great restaurant. And Angelo's. Angelo's has the best Italian red sauce. I live in Rhode Island now. Angelo's. Best Italian red sauce. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter where I am now. That will always be the best. But, you know, it was just those three places, you know, because I was small, and I really don't think I had any like real like memories of like the world until I was like 7 or 8, you know. And, you know, we would go back every year, like once or twice for like 2 weeks at a time, you know, and I'd see my pap, my mam, my grandma and grandpa, and my Aunt Debbie. And there was so little to do there. We would meet there, and then we would go to other places like Jim Thorpe, where it's a favorite place in the world, or we'll go fishing in the Lehigh River. We go to Scranton a lot, the county over, because my brother wanted to go to the Houdini Museum. And we went 3 years in a row one time, and Dorothy Dietrich, she was the magician who ran that. She's like, it's the same show every time you guys come. Why are you here? And my brother's like, because I love it. He was 8 at that point. I was 11. And like, again, I didn't have an iPhone, so I couldn't like tune out. So I just had to memorize this whole show every time we went.
Oh, Lord, was that?
It was awesome. I loved it.
Was that like, was that impact, like artistically, was that impactful for you? Was that your first intro to showbiz?
Oh, no. I don't even know what my first intro to show business was. I think it might have been like watching like Elvis videos on the computer. So much of my music stuff comes from the computer.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know?
I mean, so much of my whole identity comes from now experiencing the world from the computer. That's just the world we live in now. Yeah. And if that wasn't, it might sound super modern and sad, but if it was like generations before us, I think that was just the radio, or, you know,
TV,
early TV, whatever.
Comic books, like, you
comic
know, like
books.
I've picked up the I'm gonna sound very not country right now. I've picked up a hobby recently. It's Warhammer models, and the way you experience that stuff was going through a hobby shop, or maybe getting a magazine subscription. You know, and like that was the only place you heard about it, because people also wouldn't talk about like their dorky stuff. You know, and now like everything that I like is just everywhere.
Yeah,
you know.
So the reason I asked about Pennsylvania was I was wondering, would it be common, I guess, for someone to imagine, like if someone said an artist came out of this town, would they picture a country artist? Would that be like, would that make sense?
No, I really don't think so. No, maybe like a roots rock kind of guy, but like only from like a certain time. As much as I love, like, you know, like home, Hazleton, I will say I probably consider it more home because I never really felt at home in Cranston, you know, where I spent the rest of my childhood. You know, I'm just like, why can't I live here? Why can't I go back here? I'm happy here. You know, I can fish there. Kids, you know, here don't want to fish with me. But Hazleton really has nothing to do with my country, my love of it. You know, it's just, you know, the only country thing I did over there was just, you know, go to Eckley Minor Village. You know, we would go all the time too, because like my family was coal miners way back. Like my grandfather worked in a bank. You know, like he wasn't coal. His dad was, though, I'm pretty sure. And fishing. You know, my dad is much more of the outdoorsy type compared to like the rest of us, because that was just when he wasn't like, you know, playing baseball in the street. He'd want to go be in the woods because it's the only place he really felt calm. Yeah, you know. I wish I could say it shaped my country stuff more, but it didn't. Yeah, and nothing wrong with that. Yeah. But that's kind of cool, because it sounds like you tapped into something, I don't know, like deeper than just that, which I think is interesting. It kind of adds some interesting context. I think in my town too, like I think my second home was more of that, and that's where my whatever Southern identity kind of existed, was separate from where I was actually born.
So my thing was like, I had this strange view of things. I was born in this town called Winston-Salem, and it's a sort of city among cities in North Carolina. It's, I don't know, probably the fifth or sixth largest one in North Carolina, something like that.
Yeah.
Maybe. It's not huge, but it's a city. It's a proper city. And where I lived was on the north side of this town, and I grew up in this log cabin that my grandfather had built there. And my grandfather had all this like rustic shit laying around and like everything. He built everything, and he was a great builder, craftsman. He had a tractor and kept a huge garden and all this stuff. And I think until like my 15th birthday, I thought that we lived like out in the country, because that's what it looked like to me.
Yeah.
And felt like to me. And if somebody had asked me to describe your house, I would have described a very rural country environment. But it just happened to be just outside of a city. It just happened to be like in city limits. And then someone at my 15th birthday, I remember, said like, you don't live in the country, you live in a city. And I was like, oh shit. Do I? I guess when I go to the end of my road, I can actually see skyscrapers like at the end of the road.
Yeah.
Or when you make a few turns down the road. But my dad separated, and she moved out to like a more rural area. And that was where it was like my love of 90s country seemed to make sense, like optically. It just, that's like what everybody around was into and listened to and stuff. So, you know, I that's kind of my foundation for a love of that music. And if you had asked me before moving here, if I thought that I was going to come across an artist that played 90s country at shows, like hits and really good shit from then, I wouldn't have thought so. I'm like, I was perplexed by your existence in this town. What in maybe you can just talk about that. Maybe you can talk about like, I wouldn't have even guessed that there were country artists in Providence at all. I think of it as such a southern item that I was surprised that you're even here.
Well, you know, so people have asked me that before, you know, like, you know, they've talked about like, you know, its association, you know, with the American South, you know, or the American West, because it's country and Western. And it's funny, like the iconography, like, you know, the ideas all factor into it, like when I think about it, but when I'm listening to the music, that's hardly much of it at all. You know, because like the stuff that really brings me like, you know, to the songs that I love and the artists that I love, or the writers that I love, because oftentimes the writers and the artists are not the same in country music, which I think is really great for that industry, because, you know, everybody has to be everything today. You know, back then you could just be George Jones, you know, and George Jones was also actually an accomplished writer. He was just too nervous to be a writer. He also too disorganized to write it down. I learned that from Cocaine and Rhinestones. Okay, that's me parroting Tyler Mayhen Co.
Right.
But you know, it's truly just kind of like the point that they're getting at. You know, like I'm not a very visual writer. You know, but I love like the point of certain songs. You know, like what makes John Deere Green such a great song. You know.
I loved that you played that, by the way.
So we're getting better at it. We actually learned it for a wedding last Saturday, and they seem to like it too. But I feel like it's not there yet for us. But like when it's there, I'm gonna be so happy, because it's such a great song, and it taps into that feeling specifically. You know, that story. You know the farm kids down in Dixie, met in high school in the '60s, like. It sounds like the love that they have, you know, and it sounds like that feeling when you see two people in love, you know, like I'm even getting excited just thinking about like what that song makes me feel like. It could have been they were farm kids down in Jersey, and it still would have made me feel that same way because of just how it is, you know, there's farms in Jersey.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Yeah.
At least one.
I mean, when I drive through the Northeast, when I first drove up here to visit Providence and kind of figure out some of the lay of the land, I am always reminded driving through the highways in the Northeast that like most of the country used to be farmland. Like that's how people existed in these places. I mean, there had to have been farms close to Rhode Island 200 years ago for people to have lived. And
I technically lived more country here than I did in Hazleton, because in my dad's neighborhood, there was a Russo farm right down the street. You know, we lived in Pippin Orchard. Or sorry, we lived in Orchard Valley. That was my dad's neighborhood. And it used to be, until like the late 90s, an apple orchard owned by one of the families nearby. And that family kept a tract of their property next to our neighborhood. And then right down that street is Russo Farm. Up the other way, Confrida Farms. You know, like I lived in woodsy suburbia, but because of like, you know, who moved into the houses next door and like, you know, the identity of Cranston, it's not a rural identity, even though there's plenty of farms and things that you would associate with country living right over there. You know, like the church that I wanted to go to was right there too, you know, Holy Apostles. Yeah, no, it's funny. I didn't feel any country aesthetics living in the country area, you know, but you know, what makes a community what it is the people in it, you know, not necessarily like, and also like the attitudes, you know, of that community. And I always kind of felt not really connected to, you know, my Rhode Island community. I guess I could say Cranston, but like, you know, I kind of just associated it with like the whole world or the whole Northeast or the whole everything until like, you know, I grew up a little bit, you know, and I started looking for my people.
Yeah. Man, you're making me think of some things. You make a really interesting distinction, which is that like there's a distinction between, I guess, the term country and using that to describe what this music does versus Southern.
Yeah.
And I think being a Southerner, I think what is the sort of facade that we might live under sometimes is thinking that that lifestyle, those experiences, that culture, gardening, farming, craftsmanship, self-sufficiency, all this stuff is part of exclusively the Southern identity rather than a country identity. But of course, like we know, Canadians live this way, and people in upstate New York live this way. People outside of Providence and people in Oregon live this way. So it's kind of fascinating to me, I guess, to be thinking about this out loud with you and thinking about how this relates to this music, country, Western music, and sort of the incorrectness, I guess, of any perception that it is like an exclusively Southern music.
I don't think any music can be exclusively anything. Of course, there's roots, you know, but like that's the restrictions and conventions and the lack of things at a time to make something accessible to other people. Hillbilly music sounded like hillbilly music because that was the music that hillbillies were making with the stuff that they had, you know, like people will make art because it's what we do. And how you make your art depends on what you have. One of my favorite guitar players ever is Richie Havens, and he learned how to play guitar because he learned how to play guitar wrong, but really, really freaking cool. And he learned how to do it just by trying to figure it out because he really wanted to do it, you know? And he ended up playing it like upside down and stuff. And that was just because of the restrictions that life had put on him at that point. You know, there was nobody there to teach him how to play guitar. He figured it out and he made art, you know? The creation of art is the human thing, you know? And I think the artists and the songs that I always kind of come back to are the things that like, you know, that make me feel human, you know, and or like tackle a human sentiment, you know, as close as that artist could get to it, you know?
Yeah, I've been a long time trying to, I guess, to a certain degree, promote the idea that I do think that, it's like the human, it's the burden of the human's creation that makes it art or something. I think like not that the natural world or that like accidental creations are useless or uninteresting. There's a hand that Mother Nature can play, you know, like in the beauty of like wood grain or the beauty of a landscape itself or whatever. But it's like there's obviously a difference between like if you find a rock at a river and you think to yourself, look, it's kind of like shaped like a fish. Yeah. Versus if you find some artist who like carves these immaculate fish carvings out of marble or something like that. Those two things are very different. And I guess it's sort of the human ingenuity, the human craftsmanship or whatever, the human burden of taking on the thing and laboring over the creation that I would say is what is what is so valuable about it. It's like that human, the human contribution to it, to its creation, I guess.
Absolutely. Because like people are people, and the only thing that changes about people is like where they are and what is around them. So this actually reminded me of when my friends years ago. It's funny. It took me forever to get to Nashville, but all my friends went before me. They're up near Gatlinburg. Okay, they took like a trip up towards I think it's the Smokies over there. Mm-hmm. And they see a river, like a little stream. And my friend Jared is a science wonder, and he like, oh, we should go look for trilobites in there. Little fossilized rocks of like of old extinct critters that you can't find up here, but you can find them down there, you know. And he and my friend Connor are just like millhousing, like their pants rolled up like I have right now, like in the water, just looking for these fossils, you know. And like that's something that only like, you know, if you know it's there, or if you're from there, you just know it's there, you know. And that little adventure is just part of that locale, you know. But like, you know, we go cohogging up here, you know. I've never been because I feel like I would just pick up rocks. But, you know, like people are people. People will do what people will do. The environment is what changes. And that's what impacts the art too. Like the burden, like you said, you know, the burden is something that we all like to do. You know, we love making things, especially like, well, not everybody, but like those who are compelled to create will. Yeah.
And I think other people will create order or something like order within other domains. And we, you know, the artists are those who choose the domain of the art. But yeah, I do think people have an innate sort of inclination to create. It's just that they sometimes create in realms that are totally not what we consider artistic. You know, so some people create within the maths, which are hugely creative, but not, we don't consider math art or whatever. Some people create organization in spreadsheets that end up helping planes fly better, you know, and that's where they create.
My dad sells software, and that's the first like company where like he really like found success was Pitney Bowes, and they had an algorithm that made mail sorting machines, you know, like, and that is what made it easier for you to get your mail. And if you think about how hard it is for you to get your mail today, think about it back then in the 80s and the 90s, okay, and how they had to sort through all that. Somebody had the idea to make this thing that made your life easier, you know? That's art, you know? It's just a different kind of art. Like, we always think of art as like an emotional thing, you know? But like, now you got me thinking like maybe art is just like, well, art, how we react to art is a different question, but like, you know, the desire to just kind of make something with your day, you know, is an act of creativity. And how could you not call that art? You know? Now, it was probably a really ugly, clunky mailing machine, but like, again, somebody made it. Somebody made it, and it did a thing, and you felt a certain way about that thing, which is the second part about art. You know, art makes you feel something. Even if you feel like, even feeling nothing is feeling something. You know, so art's in everything. The burden of creation is what creates art.
Absolutely. And I don't think that those are like something like that, like within machinery or functionality or whatever, within utility. I don't think that it is. I don't think it's non-creative, and I don't think it's without like design, components of design and beauty, and I like, so I don't really know where the lines are drawn, and I think that segues us into actually one of the questions I specifically wanted to ask you, and you just started to touch on it actually, so you found a perfect way to guide us into this. What was the term you just used about what we do here with coal? Coal something? Coal?
Oh, quahogs.
What is that?
Quahogs are big ugly clams.
And quahogs.
Quahogs.
Okay.
Yeah. Also, quahogs are a great local band. You should follow them on Spotify and Apple Music. Hi, Steve and Steve. Great band. If you haven't met the quahogs yet, you gotta go meet them. Go see them. Go hear them. They're great. But quahogs are just, you know, like a certain type of bivalve, you know, that you can only find in this part of New England. And, you know, you can just go clamming, you know, and you just pick them out of the muck, you know. Kind of like my buddies were doing with those fossils that you can only find in certain places in the South.
I see.
Yeah.
Well, so that ties us into something that you said the other night that I'm really looking forward to trying to unpack with you. So I gather that we're both really attentive to terminology and its impact and its history, its roots. And you've kind of you inserted the word Western, into the sort of country Western phrase, which is like something that nobody pays attention to anymore. I think of somebody like...
You got to put respect on Gene Autry's name. You really got to.
You do. And I think of like when Colter Wall comes to mind, it's like what I think of his music is like Western music. It's like it has the Western component of country Western music.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We were talking the other night at the show, and the word folk kind of got brought up. The word Americana got brought up, and I would just love to hear your takes on why, I guess, you identify with the word country more so than Americana or folk.
So it's easier for folk than it is for Americana, so I want to start there. Folk music for me is traditional music, but not in the way that like country is, I love neo-traditional country music. I like to say that I make kind of like progressive neo-traditional country music. But folk music in particular is traditional back to like before. Like the child ballads. The child ballads of the United Kingdom, all that song index crap that inspired and was carried over to a whole lot of songs that you found in, Appalachia. And all that stuff inspired the hillbilly music. The stuff that inspired the initial country music before or initial blues music or initial anything, from like this corner of the world. Okay. You have to consider folk music, and even going further back, like the African chants and stuff, that like inspired field hollers and work songs, that's folk music, maybe you can consider the field hollers themselves also folk music. I feel like this is where like, there's no distinct line of like what becomes what,
right?
But stuff from the home country, definitely traditional folk, and I feel like folk as a genre, when you look at it from that traditional aspect, really only exists in America. Like we have music from the old country, child ballads, African music coming together, and this is like, the new sons of America, new daughters of America, like singing the songs that their grandfathers and grandmothers sang somewhere else,
Right.
Irish folk music, that's just folk music, from Ireland, there's a cultural connection there. And now folk music means somebody with an acoustic guitar singing about their feelings.
Right.
That is not true. Even Bob Dylan, who Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, Phil Oakes, all of them, they're folk music, and they all like kind of embrace it or thumb their nose at it, depending how they felt at the given moment. Still use traditional melodies, traditional lyrics, sometimes just covering the traditional songs, Bob Dylan loved to steal the lyrics and steal the melodies and then make something new, which is also very American to do. But, that's the distinction, the old country, things that don't exist anymore, something with like a real legacy. And it's kind of like, like you see it, when you see it, it to be folk music. But because of our popular conceptions now of folk music, you see me with an acoustic guitar, you'll call me a folk guy.
Right.
Inherently. That's why I wear the hat every day, Make no mistake, I'm a country singer. Americana. So Tyler Childers had a very negative reaction to winning that Americana award in 2015. And I thought that was a little crass, but I also understood his point, because he's like, this is distracting from the fact that I make country music. Americana is just taking all the American music that you can find, I think, and using those elements in combination to make something. So like Brandi Carlile calls herself Americana, and she doesn't call herself country. And I think that works for her more. And I love Brandi Carlile. First CD I ever bought, I'm pretty sure, like with my own money, was Brandi Carlile, Firewatcher's Daughter. I'm holding up fake CD.
Yeah, Jake just held up a square.
It was kind of more like a rectangle.
Yeah, a rectangle with his fingers. L7 weenie kind of thing.
But you know, that's a singer-songwriter taking elements of American music, you know? Like, if I put out a song that had jazz elements, does that make me a jazz singer? Not necessarily, you know? I think what makes me a country artist and what makes other people country artists is willingness to commit to being a country artist. Country themes, country musical elements, the history of country music. Because I think country music, like jazz and hip-hop, is a cultural music of America. You know, from a certain part of the American identity, with its own, like, heroes as well, you know? Yeah, I guess that's the distinction, too. Really committing to what it is, you know?
Heroes is a great word to use in this context. What came to mind when you said the word heroes was almost like a mythology.
Yes. Like, there's, for me, like knowing as much as I know now about, like, Merle Haggard and George Jones, they're just people, you know, people who made mistakes and have done great things, but might have not done a whole lot of good things. You know, it just depends on who you ask. You know, they're people. People are people. But if you look at them just from that country music, the content and the depth of their work and, like, you know, what they inspired, those are heroes. Those are, like, mythical people. When I met Nancy Jones, I felt like I was like speaking to the wife of, like, my God. You know, Nancy Jones is a lovely person, and George Jones really wanted to be a good person. Yeah,
man, that's I want you to know I appreciate so much just the detail with which you kind of think about these words and approach them, because I feel that way too. And in my career so far as an artist, I've run into lots of occasions where I think trying to be technical about, like, genre and technical about classification, I've just noticed that I think for consumers, for people who are, like, who want to categorize the music that they listen to, the sort of the taxing nature of being technical about this stuff can be taxing, can be exhaustive for some people, and can be like, man, just stop whining about classification. I know I've had that delivered to me before. Like, stop whining about classification and just, like, let us just categorize you. But for me, it's like a really annoying thing to be miscategorized, and for me to be on the creative side and trying to say I'm the one trying to create something that kind of fits into a world, a mythology, a hierarchy, a whatever, however you want to conceptualize it. It's just I'm creating something that exists within a certain cultural landscape, and then for it to be kind of miscategorized feels like a real misunderstanding for me. It's like a real problem.
It's almost like you're being gaslit into thinking, and, like, people are telling you you're something you're not. You know, meanwhile you're the one who made the thing. You are in charge of exactly what it is. You know, no, there are folks who misunderstand certain things about the stuff that they're creating, because I, as someone who loves country music, I only know so much about anything. You know. So something that I would say is like this, you know, people might not perceive it as such, you know, but then that's even a bigger question of audience. The genre thing, that is a money making thing initially, you know, like was then will always be, because that's just how you market it. You know, that's how you sell what you are. And I feel like because the world has gotten smaller, our ideas of certain things have become smaller, you know, like people might not call us country because we aren't what you see at the CMAs right now, even though that is changing and becoming more neo-traditional, which is such a great word. I was looking for a word for forever, and then I saw neo-traditional. I'm like, that's what I like. That's what I want, at least, like, my career right now to represent. Yeah, you know,
it's a very cool combination of words.
You know, they need to find the guy who's making up all these, like, terms. Okay, and, like, well, depending on how you feel, you either want to, like, hit him or you want to give him, like, you know, a handshake, because like, he made my life easier with neo-traditional. But then again, Tyler Childers probably wants to kill him for Americana,
right? Which I'll also throw out, like, I'm I relate, I guess. I didn't even know that about Brandy Carlisle in terms of category, though I have seen that she's heavily involved in like the Americana Music Association and Americana Fest and all that. I think I started to gravitate to that word as well, which I still do. Like that's the word that for me I've adopted in a similar way. I think like you're using these phrases in a way that like is more broadly applicable to art and antiquity and culture. And I think that's what I am trying to do as well, and why I never have tried to use folk for myself or indie folk or anything like that unless I'm like telling Spotify what playlist to put me on, you know, then like I'll have to use that. But Americana, I found myself gravitating toward because much like the examples you gave of the fossils and the clams, what I like about music is how it can capture cultural nuances and distinctions between places. So what I don't do is think of Americana as country or as in the family of country so much. I think of like New Orleans jazz as New Orleans Americana. Like that's what Americana is in New Orleans. And when I think of, there's a type of blues that comes from my neck of the woods called Piedmont blues.
Love Piedmont playing.
Piedmont blues. Yeah, you know it. I should have known you knew it. But
I have a lot of free time.
Piedmont blues, you know, is Americana to that region. And it's not, I don't think of it as like, oh, we're making something that like, so I think what I think of it as is something like it's inevitably influenced by its historic sort of the historic culture, or the historic like influence of the music of the culture. I think is how I think of Americana, and therefore I don't think of Americana in the same way that you were like, oh, that folk music is just a dude with a guitar. I think for a lot of people, Americana music is just like a folk band with a banjo player, you know?
Yeah, and like Mumford and Sons, you know, like, and it just, and to give people credit, you know, when people find the thing they like, they kind of stick with the thing they like, you know? And I don't expect people to know about George Jones the way that I know way too much about this man, you know, or like a country's nuances or Americana's nuances, you know. So like, you know, I think it's good to be forgiving, you know, to the average person who just listens to music because they like it, you know. But like, kind of going back to what you were saying earlier, like, you know, there's like a whole lot of people who are like, don't worry about the genre, just let it be whatever, you know, it is, you know, and like that's the creative process. However, what you're calling what you've made is important, you know. I feel like words matter, and I feel like you can't just let everything be everything when it comes to something that you're trying to specifically say, you know. Like I had an English teacher and we fought over this. It was Professor Eisenhart, and he was a great professor. He really helped my writing, and he said songwriting is subjective, not when it isn't. You know, sometimes you're saying something deliberately. And actually, not even sometimes, most of the time, you're saying something deliberately. You know, this is Bob Dylan's fault, you know, for just, you know, using Ginsberg poetry and just kind of just making stuff up, you know, not even meaning it. You know, it's great when he does it, you know. However, people think that's all songwriting is now. You know, it's subjective poetry. It's not, you know.
That's so true.
It can be, but it's not inherently.
No, I mean, you're bringing memories to mind, which is why I react with a little bit of volume. But you're so right. Like that's just kind of the script, I guess, that people kind of describe music with. And I remember an instance where I used to have this tradition where I always wanted to paint my face white for Halloween, and the reason was because in this Iron and Wine song, my favorite Iron and Wine song, Trapeze Swinger.
Good song.
It's an amazing song, an epic of songs, you know, a 10-minute whatever, a 10-minute epic, which you don't get to come by as much of anymore.
It's hard to do.
Yeah, it is. And he's a master of it. He's a master of a lot of things. And I get that there are moments in some of his songs that are a little, I don't know if you'd call them cryptic or anything or what, but anyway, in this song, he had this verse, please remember me at Halloween, making fools of all the neighbors, our faces painted white, By midnight, we'd forgotten one another. And when the morning came, I was ashamed, only now it seems so silly. That season left the world and then returned, but now you're lit up by the city. I just love that poetry. And to me, at face value, it sounded like it was literally Halloween and they literally had their faces painted white. But I remember mentioning this whole tradition to someone and they kind of belittled it and said, well, I shouldn't say belittled it, but their interpretation was like, well, what makes you so sure that he meant his face was actually painted white? You know, that he could just be describing fear. He could just be describing, you know, being in the dark. It could have been anything. For me, I was just like, well, I think it means his face is painted white.
Yeah. Well, like people will say, well, people will be like, what makes you think you're so sure? And at the same time, people will also be like, reference like, this meme that we used to go around on the internet. Okay. Like, the English teacher said that this was this representation of their feelings. Okay. Meanwhile, the author meant that the curtains were blue,
Right.
Like, okay, they will hit you with both of those things. And here's the thing about a great writer, it like, you just love it when you see it. It's all of that, it's the story. It's the direct thing. They are painting their faces white, and the music around it and the melodic choices and the way that they say certain things implies different feelings, not just feelings that they're saying directly, but also like other things that inspire it too. Because, emotions being so complicated, you don't just feel fear. You don't just feel happy. You feel a color of emotion, and when you find a song or a songwriter or just anything that just has that, like that sandwich of just stuff to it, you just want to rip it apart. You want to unpack everything and be like, what does he mean? Because he's like, they're saying one thing, they're saying the exact meaning. And then there's so much more meaning to get from what they're telling you, so,
spot on
to give the, why does that mean something? Like, why do you think you're right about this? To give credit to them when it's really good, there's more, but also a direct statement is a direct statement.
It can be,
but like a direct statement can be unpacked.
Yeah. And the thing is, if we're giving to the subjectivity message, if we're saying it's whatever, then in that case, somebody's literal interpretation is just as valid, I suppose, as somebody's like complicated interpretation.
Exactly. But also, like, I feel like when people say like, that's just your opinion, that's your interpretation, I feel like there's a lot of people who just don't get songwriting, like they like music because of how it feels and because of how it sounds. And like a lot of people will like a song simply because of how it sounds, not even because of like, the feeling that they're getting from it. They're like, that just sounds cool. That's cool technique. That's cool production. That's cool, whatever. And I feel like a lot of people just don't train themselves to look at like what they're saying and go, this is what they're saying. Why are they saying it?
Right. Well, so speaking of song, before I overshoot our time, when we're approaching the end, probably, you also said something to me the other night that it was a flattering question and one that stuck with me, and I wanted to like make sure we spent some time talking about writing because of this question you asked me. At the show the other night, you had asked me how I kind of came across the voice of my writing that I use. So I think we should talk about voice. I think we should talk about your voice and my voice and whatever, just the
it's a narrative voice, right?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I would love to know. I think the best way to start that question, well, there's two ways. I could invite you to elaborate on that question. Tell me what you mean by that question. And then I would also love for that to inform me getting the chance to learn about the intention, I guess, behind your narrative voice, behind your voice as a writer, what you love about writing, what you like to play with.
Okay. So what's the first one more time?
If you want to maybe expand upon that question and how you like for those who might be listening and maybe don't intuitively understand that question.
Okay.
Maybe you can talk about that.
Well, it's like, like where do you get your narrative voice? How do you tell that story? Why and how do you tell that story? Why are you telling me this story? How is your story on finding love different? How is your story on, getting hurt any different from mine? How did that make you feel? What parts made you feel a certain way? What made you want to make the song? Because the thing that made you want to make the song is the thing that comes out first on purpose or by accident, you know, like, and I feel like all writers want to get it on purpose at some point, you know, like they're working towards making it a deliberate action of saying, I want to tell you exactly how I feel here, you know, or exactly why this story matters. So back to John Deere Green, you know, you feel a very specific way about that story and about that song, you know, like, or rather I do. And the language choices predict how most people will feel about that song, you know, like language and melodic choices, of course. And, you know, I really like asking songwriters, like, you know, like what made you want to say this, you know, but also like we like certain things a certain way, you know, so like there's going to be some consistency to it, you know, especially like, you know, when you're a seasoned writer, you know, like what are the things that you like to put out, you know, from these experiences? Because not every song has to come from an experience, you know, sometimes the song just comes to you as it is, you know, but the things that you want to put out there are the things that you're thinking about in it, you know, which dictates your narrative. And for me, it always does kind of come back to like, I'm kind of self-absorbed in my writing, and I want to get away from that a little bit. But like, even if the song is a complete lie, you know, and like, you know, not about anything that really happened, it's like a reflection of the information that I've received, you know, and what's the key information that I want to convey, you know. So I'm trying to kind of in the shortest amount of time tell you. When I say shortest amount of time, I mean like the most, without leaving any gaps, you know, in the story. Just telling you the most important things in this information, you know, in this song, you know, giving you the most, what affected me will affect you, you know. That's kind of like my narrative, you know, I like to think. But also like, I think about this a lot, but then like, you know, when I sit down to write, I kind of write frantically and I edit very critically and I kind of impose the narrative because like what do all these things mean like in their chunks? Deliberate statements or like, you know, just playing with like, you know, with how like the mouthfeel of a word, you know, you know, take a scalpel and I make it something, make it make sense. And sometimes that's just what the song is, you know, just what you're able to make with the pieces that you had. But even then, like, you know, like I know like what I'm going to say as a writer, what sounds right coming out of my mouth, and just general assertions that I would make in my life, you know.
I like that you pointed out, you've said a lot of things that I just wish I could unpack really, really deeply.
I feel like I ramble. That's something. I ramble so much in my regular life that I try not to ramble in my songs.
Okay. Yeah. I appreciate that. Well, no, I mean, you've said things that to me make sense as just like a fellow writer that I'm like, that I'd love to hear more about. And some of them I'll sacrifice for the sake of time, but you just mentioned like, not only like the comfort of a word coming out of your mouth, but also the surgical sort of process of editing and stuff. Some people don't really like to talk about like the depths of their craft, I guess. Some people, it's like a little bit secretive and don't want to, you know, lose any mystery or whatever. So like by all means, if you don't want to, don't have to. But if you're willing to share any of your your rules that you might practice for yourself with your writing, I'd be curious to hear about that.
So there's no mystery at all. Like the only mysterious thing about my writing is when my brain lights up. It's literally like I can see it, you know. Like, you know, like the corners of my brain get like this light blue, like hot blue light, you know, but my brain feels cool. And I just have this zeroed in focus, you know, and then that's when I know I got the ball rolling. And that lasts 30 seconds and that lasts several hours. It just depends on when I got it. Ritalin might help. I don't know. Yeah. So it all starts with a word or a phrase that catches my eye. With my song, I Might Be Ready Now, I had the word jettisoned, like just floating around because I saw it somewhere. I'm like, I like that word, you know? And I don't even think I'd ever say that in like conversation, you know, but I just liked it. It was fun. And also like, I was like, I can use this for something. So I wrote it down on my phone notes and I kept it. And then I was trying not to like swallow my own tongue in a rhetoric class in college. I was so bored. And then my professor said, I might be ready now. And then I nearly like shot out of my seat because I'm like, I might be ready now. I might be ready now. I wrote it like Jack Torrance consistently over my notebook, trying to figure out what that was, you know? And then when I went home for like a long break in college, but not like winter break, because I went back afterwards and I showed the song to all my college buddies. I had like a little riff from when I was in high school that didn't even end up becoming like the melodic line in its entirety of I Might Be Ready Now, but it was, you know what, actually, I'm going to show you.
Yeah, feel free.
Let me see. I was messing around with that and I was trying to get into a different key, and then that was like how it was initially, and then I figured out like different like the chords. So like just kind of just seeing where the melody went.
Yeah.
And I was like just kind of just trying to fit the word in, you know? And I was like, what does jettison mean? Okay. Jettison my head, as of right now, I feel happy. I just kind of started filling in the gaps. And this song ended up having 4 verses. 2 of them gone, you know? But I was like, this is just kind of where it is. And then I got to the chorus, you know? I really loved writing in Mixolydian at this point in my life too. I still do. It's just so fun. And then the chorus was, and I might be ready now. Yes, I might be ready now. Didn't even know what that meant yet. Okay, what am I ready for? And then I don't even know what made me get there. It might have just been like pure creation at that point, you know. How far could you go? Were you not allowed? But it was more than just 3 words. And I might be ready now. Yes, I might be ready now. More than just 3 words. You know, I love you, I hate you, anything. You know? Like, that, I love the ambiguity of that, you know? The power of that ambiguity makes you feel something, you know? That tension, you know? And there's a lot of tension in those chord choices, you know? And there's like, during that creative process, there was like trying to figure out, you know, how to use that tension, you know, to create that emotional tension.
Tension, conflict, unanswered questions. I think all these things are underrated in songwriting. I really appreciate when somebody's willing to kind of like leave something unanswered. And not only does that, I think, provide a really interesting experience for a listener who can ask those questions or even fill that space for themselves. Like they might gather something from that phrase that totally fills that gap for them, and they know what their experience of I Might Be Ready Now means for them. But it also gives them the even if they don't reach a conclusion of that sort, it gives them the same ambiguous experience of that mystery of like the pleasant, like sort of pleasure that there is in this mystery that we get to experience together.
Yeah, and kind of going back even further, at the same time, you know, I still feel like I'm deliberately saying something, you know, but like, you know, like a lot of people will like skirt around the topic. That's kind of what that song is designed to do, you know? And there's moments of passive aggressiveness and also moments of forgiveness and a whole lot of other things happening in that song that I'm really proud of. I think it's my second best song that I've ever written. And because of all like the language I'm playing with, because I still feel like I'm saying something, but I'm also, you know, the ball is also in the listener's court in some kind of way, you know? Like I'm trying to make you feel this exact type of tension and personal frustration, and you get to tell me where it's related to.
Actually, that was one of the little things I wrote down here was something about, you know, we're both aware of like different patterns that exist in songwriting and different tools people use and stuff. And that those tools can be tiny and they can also be extremely informative, and you could think of them as a limitation to what somebody's willing to write about or something.
Yeah.
One of the things I wrote down here was like patterns that kind of have been hinted at throughout our conversation so far is like intention versus accident, something like that. Like I value a lot accidental writing,
Yeah.
like things that just kind of, I don't know, it just felt right and I just put it there, versus that intended, like this is the purpose that I put behind this phrase. But also this idea of sort of the truth in songwriting being derived from direct first person experience, like it's a dictation, like it's a eyewitness account of your own life or something like that.
Yeah.
Versus like story, versus like a narrative that can kind of escape from reality. And I think I used to, when I was younger, think that most of my writing was like semi-autobiographical. And I think I've come to realize that it's a lot more sort of, how would you say the word analogy, but in the word like analogistic or something like that?
I always want to say allegorical, but it's also not allegory because that's just not the right word. But like, like you're like Narnia is the allegory for like the Bible or something, you see themes and you see characters that are reminiscent of another thing, like you see the themes and characters in your songs that are reminiscent of things in your life, but they're not necessarily a one-to-one comparison.
Yeah.
I think allegory is the one-to-one comparison, but there's another word, and I don't know. I think it is what you said, but like, it's a representation.
Yeah.
But it is not the truth. And that's what I think the truth is. I don't think like when it comes to the human truth, not like, like true, like facts, dictation of facts, this happened on this date. That is a dictated fact, of reality. But personal truth does not necessarily exist in reality. It is a fluid reality of emotion almost, like, the thing where it's like, like you look in the mirror and you see yourself and other people see you differently, how you see the world and how you put that back out in your art is just as true as somebody else who does not have anything to do with anything that you've ever done, like you have no connection to another artist, but their truth and your truth are all the same kind of true because your perception of reality, personal truth is like, like a reflection of the world coming in. That's actually, that's my narrative voice. My music, my narrative voice is a reflection of the world around me as I see it.
Yeah.
Or as I can see it in that moment, because also like the song that I write at 19 isn't going to be the song that I'm going to write at 27, So, you also kind of have to like factor in that moment of time as well. But like, I think I've done a really good job, and part of me being crazy is like, I want the things that I say to be reflective of how I feel, kind of base level Jake, the Jake that will always be.
Yeah.
I
was so intrigued by that question when you asked me that. We were out front. Our sets had ended and the next set was about to start. And I thought about it a while because I'm aware of certain epochs in my writing career so far that like are defined by certain things I was interested in. But my narrative voice, my narrative interest, stuff like that, I think ties to my interest in the word Americana. I think what I really love is, there's a few things I really love. One thing I really love is preservation of experiences. And so I really love something like if I can collect enough of a picture of a thing, trying to preserve that thing in some way, whether that's like a little anecdote, a little emotion, like an emotional experience. The emotional experience side being most common for me, I think. Like I'll experience a strange emotion that I don't really get to come by that often in life. And I'll be like, okay, I have to figure out how to write a song that captures that emotion and tells that story over and over because it's such a unique experience that I want it to live. Other versions, like the preservation side of that description, are more like, okay, I have this story in my mind of my lineage. For example, I wrote this song, Way to Live, that is all about my family on both my mom and dad's side and all the stuff they've been through and where I exist in the context of all that stuff. And that wasn't so much like one single emotion that I wanted to preserve. It was like a much broader theme that I wanted to preserve. And so that was more of a writing exercise than it was like one of those things that the blue light you described, that's just like a writing spell that is kind of in the moment and you're really inspired and you've got the ball rolling.
Yeah.
This was more of an active writing exercise. That's like, I'm choosing to write these things. I'm not inspired in the moment in some kind of physical way.
Yeah.
But I have enough tools in there right now for the story that I can put it together.
Yeah. I feel like that's kind of where like, so because like it took, I might be ready now, a couple weeks to reach its like almost its final conclusion. That song was not really finished for like several months, but like, like once you know what you want to say, you start making it say what you want it to say, I never thought about the preservation aspect, but I feel like I might be thinking about that as well because like, I want it to be like, I say this is Jake, this is a Jake Hunsinger song inherently, which I think is a weakness of mine, because I want to like write for other people. I have written for other people, but it's still me. It's still like, my stylistic chops and the preservation of a moment, like you're talking about, that's like you said, that's the on purpose part.
Yeah.
Right. I want to be able to capture a different thing on purpose. That's a hole that I've been unable to like dig myself out of. And also not really playing with imagery, I don't have images.
Yeah. That was a pivotal thing for me. Mm-hmm. One of those epochs actually was imagery. It was like, I think the earliest days for me was all autobiography. Mm-hmm. And later it started to become other things, cleverness and slight humor and stuff like that, in a John Prine kind of way.
Yeah.
But eventually, imagery was one of my big creative discoveries for me. That was just like, oh, I don't want to describe, I don't want to explain things anymore. I want to describe scenes that do the explaining for me. And that's been one of the most important one of the most important additions to my narrative voice was like, I want to paint pictures in my storytelling.
Yeah.
And still tell stories. And that's kind of one of the differences. Iron and Wine actually was one of the people who I listened to, and I was like, why the fuck do I experience his songs in such this different way than I do other people's? And I realized after a while it was because of his use of imagery. And I was like, that's brilliant. It's his writing is so visual, and I'm very fascinated by that, but I don't want to sacrifice story and narrative entirely.
Yeah.
Because I think in some of his older stuff, it's like, it's nothing but visual experiences, and I love that stuff. But I wanted to keep the sort of Appalachian country songwriting tradition in mine and still work in some of that imagery. So I think if I had to describe how my music works, I think that's kind of a really crucial part of it. And then I have a lot of stuff that I just like won't do in my writing that helps keep it kind of in a certain, I don't know, certain family.
Yeah. Well, there's also like chord and melodic choices that can like put you in different things. But yeah, no, imagery, I can't, and this is a mark of my like, inherent, like, I don't know, like, I guess like I'm not using this in the negative way. I'm saying literally like my self-centeredness, like my main character of my life feeling is like, I can't do what Harry Chapin did great, which was tell a story and you see it happen. He's basically telling you like the story of like this is a song that made America famous. It's about the firefighters, not being able to put out a fire, and a plumber runs in and he rescues a family. Everything about that is a visual experience, and it has nothing to do with Harry. And then there's other songs, that use imagery to kind of tell you the story. Like you were talking about with Iron and Wine, the imagery tells you the story.
So what is it about using imagery that's hard to work into your current sort of approach? Is it that the imagery is too separate from you?
Yes. So as we were talking about this, I was thinking, like I've never like seen a tree and gone like, this means something to me, but that's not true actually. Cause I was thinking about the first time I saw a copper beech tree, and like, not to sound like Ralph Waldo Emerson or something, but like nature, but like, I remember I was 9, and in the chapel view plaza, there was a copper beech tree, and it's huge, and it's like a god. It's this giant tree with red leaves, and I was like mesmerized by how big it was and how small it was. And in that moment, like I'm thinking of that feeling, and I'm like, ooh, that could be a cool song. How do I make it sound like I'm not just talking about a tree? You know? And like, how can part of it is like honestly like I think a gap in my writing where I can't really convey the depth of what I was feeling. You know, I had a friend say, why don't you talk about wonderment more? Because like I like to experience the world like that, you know? But how do you express that? I am so not there yet. I really, really want to be able to talk about the wonder, you know, the wonder of life. But I don't know. I think the closest I got was writing Wild Horses of Wyoming, but that's not even the wonder of life. It's about like, you know, like the peace of mind that comes with death, the inevitability of peace of mind and the inevitability of death. You know, I don't know if that's wonder or not, you know, but that's probably like the headiest I ever get. You know, I really, really want to work on that, but none of the songs for the new album that are coming out have anything like that yet.
And when's your new album come out?
When the baby's here.
Okay.
So next year. And I'm going to go home and write after this. I'll tell you that right now, because I'm thinking about that Copper Beach. I'm thinking about my feeling as a kid. I'm thinking about my daughter right now, and I'm like, okay, I have something now.
There's something there.
Let's see if I can actually like finish it. That's the thing too. You ever have any like really great idea and you're like, oh, it just doesn't. You can't connect the craft. So that's a big part of my work. My craft and my inspiration only line up at certain points. You know, the things that I get when I'm inspired, I take and I craft afterwards. For like my best ones, okay, they meet at a certain junction for just like parts of a song, not even the entirety of the song. So I'm very craft based, you know. And how do you get the ethereal wonder into something so mechanical like craft? Songwriters do it, so I'm going to try it. I'm going to do it. It happens when it happens.
I have the craft process there when I have to use it, but it's weird. The longer that I've been writing, the more it's like the shorter the writing time has gotten, and it's like less and less editing, less and less second glances. Sometimes there are songs that they demand too much from me, and it's just like I'm going to have to write this over a number of days, and that's just how it's going to have to be for this one. But more usually it's like really fast, and it's really the first time I write the song is like when the song is done. And I don't know, that's probably a decision. That's just like let myself be more impulsive rather than analytical or something.
Well, that comes with like, you know, confidence as well, you know, like the confidence of a writer, you know, the confidence that you can the confidence that you can do it to the standard that you want it to be, that your craft and inspiration measure up to your level of taste. You know. And sometimes like the idea isn't there until you just learn more about actual like craft or even taste, you know, like how you want your song to sound will be dictated by a song that you hear and you're like, I want to do that. I want to do that better. I want to do that differently. You know, it all gets there. If you are constantly looking, you will get there. You know, that's the thing. You have to do it every day. You don't have to write everything every day, but you have to think about it every day. You have to be in it every day. And I'm in it every day. My future sister-in-law, she was worried about my like creative time with the baby and all that. I'm like, I'm thinking about writing songs right now as I'm talking to you. You know, like everything. I'm trying to pick apart things that you're gonna say that I could use later. Yeah. You know, and she's like, cool. And like she never like, you know, like when I told her that, she's like, oh wow. But I also wonder if that made her a little uncomfortable. Like, I'm listening to everything you're saying. Everything.
Yeah, man, being observant. Being constantly awake, constantly aware. Yeah, that is it's probably the most crucial bit of all that.
Some people can't turn it off. Roger Miller went nuts. Like the reason he did like, you know, all that speed is because he couldn't turn his brain off. It's freaky. It's freaky how quick that man saw life faster than the speed of light. And I think I'd go nuts. You know, I don't think I could live in that man's head. Yeah, you know. But it's also amazing because, like, Roger Miller's Roger Miller, you know? Like, because of how he saw the world and how he took in information, that's how he put these things out.
Yeah. Okay, I think I already see where our next conversation will lead us. like other people, like writing habits that we've learned, and other observers that we might be interested in, which is ultimately what I think artists, a great word for what artists are, is like observers in a way. I have a staple question that I'm asking in this iteration of the podcast. So my previous podcast was called Red House, and that made sense for where I lived and for what that podcast was. Now that I'm in a different place and my podcast is a little more mobile with me, this podcast is called Venture, which is, I haven't memorized the perfect definition of this word, but it's a risky journey. It's a daring endeavor. And so what I like to ask people is, what is the greatest risk, the most valuable risk that you've taken in your life so far?
Oh, dude, that's heavy. That's awesome.
I should have warned you about this question.
No, that's like the best question I've ever been asked. I'm stealing that for parties. Most important like venture, or like most important risk that I've.
Most important risk, most valuable risk, or best risk?
I think the best risk was 8th grade. And I wasn't singing yet because I was terrible, but I was playing guitar, and I was playing guitar better. You know, I was getting better and better. And I was studying like Led Zeppelin videos, trying to play like Jimmy Page. I even had my hair as long as him, you know, like I really wanted to be like a guitar god for a while before I realized that, like, you know, like I like words with meaning. When I realized that Stairway to Heaven is like a lot of stuff, you know, I'm like, you got to give me more than that. You got to give me more. And I had horrible anxiety about this, you know, like I just felt nervous. You know, I never felt at home in Rhode Island for the longest time. I never felt at home, but I really wanted people to like me. I still do. Part of why I do this now is because I want people to tell me that I do a good job. You know, there's a weird pathological look for validation that like I joke about, but I mean, and I think that's inherent to all artists. Yep. Please tell me I'm pretty. But I was gonna play In My Time of Dying, an 8-minute song, and I was gonna play it without singing it, and I had a gut reaction as like the week before. I'm like, I'm changing my song, and I'm going to do Dazed and Confused because that's a little bit more of an interesting song. But I was going to do it with the violin bow solo, which I've never done. And my mom, terrified. She was clawing my dad's wrist, watching me do it, waiting for it to, like, you know, explode or something bad to happen. And I killed it. It was amazing. It was people remarked like people wouldn't stop talking about it, you know? And like my dad, my parents have always kept me humble, and they tell me when I suck. And it's great because like part of my critical eye, and I don't mean being critical, like my ability to like really like analyze something has come from them, because it's always about improving, you know? My parents, like the voice in my head about doing better is my parents. It's my mom and my dad. And my dad was so proud and so impressed. And my mom was like, I can't tell you shit. I can't tell you anything ever again. It didn't stop her from trying, but that's just my mom, you know, that's just how she is. But they were so proud, and people talked about it for like a long time, like all the kids and all the teachers. My dad, he told me this a while after the fact. There was a kid who was like really talented on piano or something. Okay. And the kid's dad was talking to my dad about my guitar thing in front of his kid. You know, and my dad's like, oh yeah, and your son was really great too on the piano too. He's like, yeah, but like the bow, the bow. And I'm like, that was me trusting my gut for the first time when it came to, you know, a performance thing, you know, because the year before I just didn't show up. I panicked and I didn't show up. I didn't play it. I was going to sing and play, and I couldn't do that. And I didn't want to be some sympathy case, you know, where you're like, man, this guy sucks, but we're going to clap anyways just because he's there. I'm like, no, I'm going to be good. And of course I didn't feel like I'd ever be good that first time. And I still have that voice in my head all the time. But my gut instinct then was right. And the only time anything has ever gone wrong for me is if I didn't trust my gut. And I still don't do it all the time. Life would be easier for me if I did trust it all the time. But yeah, that was my first risk. And it feels so small now, but I remember in that moment I was like terrified. It was because you're supposed to prepare for things, you know, you're supposed to work at things, you're supposed to have routine, you're supposed to do things a certain way. And I'm like, no, I have to. God, yeah, no, that's the most important one that I've made thus far when it comes to my music, because it's set me up to be where I am right now when it comes to my musical intuition and my critical eye, and also just being like, fuck you. No, I can do it. I can do it.
It's kind of a beautiful thing to be able to recall your first like important risk and the one that sounds, I would imagine, really definitive for your artistic journey. Being able to identify when you started trusting yourself, that's a pretty special thing, I think.
And you know, like, I think it comes with being like a navel gazing songwriter, that like, you know, you're always asking yourself, did you do the right thing? You know, did I do the wrong thing? Could I have done this better? You know, what led me to this point? You know, because that's how you get some art out of it. You know, like, you know, the analysis is what gives you something to say, but the instinct, the gut reaction, everything, you know, that like led me to this point is kind of why I say things at all. Trusting my gut that I have something to say and that this is good. And also trusting your gut when this is bad, you know, like when I don't feel right, I fight with myself to make it feel right, which is can have mixed results, you know, could be, oh, it could send me down a different way, or, you know, I could just end up like wasting time. But regardless, like, you know, my gut will influence these decisions. If I listened to my gut more, I'd be way better at blackjack. I'm dead serious. Like I would have made so much more money 2 weeks ago. But yeah, that's, you know, like you said, you know, that's when I learned to trust myself.
I think that's the perfect note for us to end on today. And I look forward to us picking up on maybe even more of your bio and where how music kicked in, but also where we were starting to get to with sort of different writers' oddness and stuff like that. So I feel like we have a lot of things that we're going to get to talk about. So I hope we'll do this again.
Please, I would love to.
Awesome. All right, man.
All right. Thank you so much.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Thanks for checking out this episode of Venture. If you want to be one of the first people to access new episodes when they come out, I have a Patreon that is for my music as well as my podcasting interests. It is patreon.com/Tyler Nail. Feel free to join there.